It is 107 days until America will vote for its next president in what could be one of the most important policy-based elections in history. My next guest knows what it takes to win the White House. He helped lead Donald Trump to victory in 2016 as the chief executive of his campaign. Joining me right now is once again former White House chief strategist, host of War Room Pandemic, Steve Bannon. Steve, it is great to see you this morning. Thanks for being here. We want to roll out these polls this morning from Fox News and get your take on all of this, because once again, we see the president lagging. What do you think is going on? Here is President Trump on the economy. 47% approve, 47% disapprove, Steve. And then you've got other polls which show the president lagging Joe Biden. Your take?
Listen, when you go back and look I think it was in March, 51% of the American people thought President Trump was doing a good job, a solid job in leadership on this pandemic. I think in the poll it's 37, 38%, something like this. This is about just bold action and bold leadership. What I think the president should do, my recommendation would be, every day start to have the top people around you, Dr. Fauci, Dr. Birx, the vice president, Dr. Redfield at CDC, Chief of Staff Meadows, have them in the Oval, get briefed every day on an action plan, just drive action, 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 and do it through action, urgency, and focus. And, you know, get a plan for masks, you know, get a plan for the schools, bring the governors in. But with those 5 people around the desk, and then every couple of days you bring the media in and you tell them what the plan of the day is. You tell them where we're driving action. President Trump's a man of action. When he's taken action on whether shutting down China, shutting down Europe, declaring this a national emergency, when President Trump's taken action, the polls reflect that. So I think the poll should be an indication to people in the White House that, hey, you're in the driver's seat here. Just go back to the plan you've got. And also, you've made a decision about federalism I think is very smart, but include the governors now, particularly as, you know, this kind of weaponized virus, you know, is impervious to summer heat and humidity. It also is asymptomatic. It also targets, it looks like it targets the most vulnerable. And so this is where they have to have, I think, targeted interventions. I think Dr. Birx has talked about this in the past. The White House has all the elements. I think it's just bring it together around President Trump in a principles only, and every couple of days bring the media in there and let President Trump explain what action he's taken. Not one of these 2-hour press conferences where the media can throw out all these other questions, but focus on the pandemic. If you focus on the pandemic, you'll start to make real progress in that. And I think the polls will all start to fall in place. Remember, the CCP lied. Americans died. I think the president can take leadership in this and drive this, and I think the polls will take care of themselves.
What can you say about Joe Biden's plans right now, Steve? This week, the former vice president unveiled a climate plan to cost $2 trillion. Look, he is going to be raising taxes. He's already discussed that he's going to be raising taxes. If Elizabeth Warren is his running mate or not, she could be Treasury Secretary, but she will certainly be an important key voice in the economy. She wants to institute a wealth tax. You know, look, we are facing a $22 trillion debt, and you would say, okay, you have to raise taxes in that regard, but he's using that higher revenue to come up with things like a $2 trillion green plan. What's your take on Biden's agenda?
Look, Biden doesn't know what his agenda is. He's trying to reinvent himself every day. He goes up to Scranton, Pennsylvania, and makes this kind of populist economic nationalist speech. He's really the concierge of Wilmington, Delaware, which is the headquarters of all the global corporations. You know, Joe Biden, to me, has to come forward to the American people and tell what his plan on China is. The president's kind of war council has laid out the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse against the Chinese Communist Party: the National Security Advisor, head of the FBI, the Secretary of State, and then obviously Attorney General Barr in that magnificent speech. Those 4 individuals laid out an integrated and coherent war plan to confront the Chinese Communist Party on technological and information war and economic war, and then with our allies start to open up the South China Sea and support our allies in India on the border of Chinese-occupied Tibet. You're seeing an integrated war plan put together to take down, confront first and then take down the Chinese Communist Party, to call their bluff. And Joe Biden, in his entire speech the other day on economics, mentioned China, I think, one time, talking about electric vehicles. Joe Biden is the candidate of globalization. He's He's a total globalist. He is kowtowed to the Chinese Communist Party. The president has a coherent plan against the Chinese Communist Party. I would like the Secretary of Treasury to join in there and the Treasury to start to drop the hammer. But you've seen a coherent war plan. I think you've just got to get that same level of coherence on the Chinese virus that's here, the CCP virus that has come to the United States. And I think if you do that, things will come together. And I don't think Joe Biden has an answer. So far, it's been virtually incoherent.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to the China story in a second, but who do you think Joe Biden will choose as his vice presidential candidate?
Well, I think the polling internal to Biden, I think the number one thing they're looking at is somebody that can't throw him off the where he's going right now. So I think whether it's Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, I think they're looking at a number of candidates. I don't think it's going to matter at the end of the day who his VP is, because really I think Joe Biden's the one that's going to get smoked out. If President Trump continues to drive action, that Biden's going to be smoked out and going to have to really confront President Trump on the hustings, you know, and I just don't think he's going to stand up. Right now, remember, nothing he puts forward is really coherent, and he's trying to reform himself rebrand himself as a populist and economic nationalist against 45 years of his track record. It's going to be very, very difficult as the Trump campaign, as a full force multiplier off of what's happening at the White House, I think begins to really identify and kind of brand Joe Biden for what he is.
Yeah, that was an incredible speech that AG Barr made this week, basically calling out corporate America, Steve, to say, look, you cannot collaborate with the Chinese Communist Party, that you are putting profits over the short term ahead of the real issues around national security over the long term. Do you think increasingly companies are getting it, or are they still seeing the opportunity to sell widgets to 1.4 billion people?
Well, they better get it, because he put a shot across the bow when he talked about FARA. And he said, hey, not only he used the word, remember, this is a very smart guy, he used collaborator and appeasement. Okay, collaboration and appeasement. Those words were specifically chosen by Attorney General Barr to put corporate America on notice. Then he talked about FARA. He talked about you guys being lobbyists and actually being unregistered foreign agents. So this is something that he really threw down on. And I got to tell you, it was a magnificent speech. The other ones of the NSA director, of the FBI director, of Pompeo, also have to be reviewed in an entire context of where President Trump is taking this, really, I think, as a war leader on economic and information war. What we have to do today is then stop playing games with the CCP. Stop being a supplicant about this virus. We have to tell them, I believe, you turn over every piece of information, you open up the P4 lab, you let Americans and other scientists from around the world go in there and interview everybody, get every document, or we're going to cut you off. We're going to cut you off from the U.S. dollar. We're going to sanction your banks, and we're going to sanction the highest members of the Chinese Communist Party, Wang Qishan and Xi. It's time for President Trump's got a great saying, no games. It's time to stop playing games with this murderous dictatorship.
Yes.
They lied. The American people have died. Their own people have suffered immensely. The Chinese Communist Party people, the people there are innocent victims of this dictatorship. Bill Barr called it out. Right now, Secretary of State Pompeo is to say, you open up every lab, and the Secretary of Treasury should come in with the backing of the President of the United States and say, we're off the dollar, we're sanctioning every bank, we're going to sanction individuals until you come clean, and we can get therapeutics and a vaccine and know exactly what this thing is. Listen, this thing being asymptomatic, this thing being impervious to humidity and heat, this thing targeting the most vulnerable population, the aged, comorbidities, minorities. This virus we know very little about. It's time for them to stop hiding the information.